physically shook the heavy cupboard. Now Mr. Pym fled the area in terror, and it's probably a good thing for him that he did, because within 2 or 3 weeks of that time, while making alterations to the square outside, workmen uncovered a small, shallow grave. And in that grave, sure enough, were the broken, beaten, lifeless, decomposed bodies of several young orphans. Murdered! Oh, brilliant, thank you. Murdered for no other reason than that they were all alone in the world and completely without protection. Now, these days the ghosts of Bedern do tend to remain fairly quiet. They don't cause much of a disturbance, but I am told that there has been the occasional modern sighting. Residents have reported shoeless children in rags just playing on the street corners through the estate, but what I find particularly interesting about this particular legend is this. Actually, do you want to hear what I find interesting about this particular legend? So, well, let's have a vote about it. Hands up those who'd like to hear it. Hands up those who wouldn't like to hear it. Unless you don't give a toss what I do. It's kind of an interesting epilogue, really. All of the witnesses of the legendary phenomena of the ghosts of Bedern are always, and always have been, residents of a small, precise part of the centre of York that constitutes the ancient parishes of the city, the same parishes who were responsible for placing these children in the workhouse at the mercy of Mr. Pym. It's almost as though their restless and unquiet spirits are still trying to say to the living, remember us, remember our fate, and don't ever let it happen again. Now we're going to carry on to one final place where I have one final set of things to tell you. Before we do, though, another couple of health and safety points, I'm afraid. First of all, just to remind you that there is a railing here which you may wish to step over rather than attempting to pass through. And the other thing is when we get to the far end, there's going to be another one of these terrifying roads. So if you wouldn't mind, do please just try to make sure that you cross over to the other side of the road and not just to the other side.
Do make sure. Go on. Funny. So got a smile on your face.
Enjoying this. It's great. It is. I've got it. Thank you, Laura.
And that wee girl is Laura as well.
What?
That wee girl.
No, the big girl called Helen, which is Helen.
No, she called Laura.
Helen.
Laura.
Helen.
Laura.
Is it Helen?
He said Laura. It's Laura. Laura.
Find your kids.
I'm calling her later. Trust me. He said Laura. Damn, there's no
Alright, please.
Give me one as well. Right. Jennifer. Yeah.
It's been annoying me for a week now, hasn't it? Dude, come on. You can get a lot closer if some of you come around here as well. I assume that's desirable, of course. Really, this is... Can I have some brave soul to step forward and then others will follow them? Thank you. They really did follow you, didn't they? Oh well. Here we are now. We've come to stand here in King's Square, mainly because it marks the top of the Shambles, probably the most famous medieval street in the whole of Europe. But, well, I should say actually, the Shambles used to snake out considerably further than it does today, so if you have been standing around, well, anywhere around here really, about 400 years ago, you may very well have found yourselves ankle deep in an open sewer, which was running with coagulating blood, flesh, entrails, maybe, if you were really lucky, the occasional eyeball glancing playfully at you as it bobbed its way merrily through. Because the Shambles was the medieval street of the butchers. All the animals, the pigs, the sheep, the goats, the chickens, the cuddly little lambs would all reverse in large machinery. Quite the sound effect we would have wanted just for that moment, but nonetheless. They would appoint us, all these animals would trot their way merrily through here, full of the joys of spring, and have their throats cut in the alleyways in between the buildings. Now, the meat was displayed on cast iron hooks above the windows and also on little wooden platforms in front of all the windows. I tell you this because you'll still see them if you wander along there in a few minutes. So the meat was in front of all of the buildings and the blood used to flow day in, day out. But the area was only cleaned roughly once a week, usually on a Tuesday morning. So if you've been standing around here about this time of night on a Monday, you would probably have been knee deep in cows' noses, chickens' lips, goats' kneecaps. It was something like a trip to McDonald's. But it was also known to be very unhygienic, allegedly the starting point for many of the great epidemics of York. Cholera, typhoid, bubonic plague, they were all said to have begun around here. But despite this, the poor people of the city would come along on a Sunday morning, bringing their families with them to help, as they picked through the rotting remains to choose themselves a nice juicy offcut to take home for their Sunday dinner. Now, this has nothing to do with why we come and stand here, just a chance to say lots of horrible things in a short period of time. We actually like to finish in this area because the Shambles is also said to be the most haunted street in the city. And the reason we picked this spot exactly is because here is one of the reasons. The Shambles lies directly in between two graveyards, of which this is one, the graveyard of Christ the King. The other one is down the far end, just around the corner on the left, the graveyard of St. Crux. But the graveyard of St. Crux lies opposite an even more sinister sight. Marks and Spencer. Now, many people find this hard to imagine, but in fact, back in the sort of 15th and 16th centuries, in York and in many other cities like it, there was no Marks and Spencer. It's probably why they used to die so much younger. Not enough socks and handkerchiefs to keep them going. They had to peel their own vegetables. But where Marks and Spencer now stands, down there on the bottom right, used to be the occasional execution site for Elizabethan York. So the Shambles lying in between that on the right, the graveyard of St. Crux on the left, and the graveyard of Christ the King just here, is said to be the most haunted street. Now, its most famous ghost belongs to Sir Thomas Percy, the 7th Earl of Northumberland, who was beheaded for attempting to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. He was given a completely fair trial for his crimes, entirely in his own absence, and funnily enough was found guilty of high treason and sentenced to death by beheading. Now at this stage they constructed a 12-foot high scaffold down there on the bottom right where the Marks and Spencer's meat section now stands, so that the whole of York could come along and witness his death. In those days, you see, a public execution really was seen as something of a public holiday. It was a chance to take the day off work, bring the children along, pack a few sandwiches, buy a bit of popcorn on the way in, make a quick bet as to which side of the basket the head might land in, sing a few songs, do a quick Mexican wave, a short round of Another One Bites the Dust. Just, really enjoy the good old-fashioned spectacle and entertainment of a proper British killing. But I have to say, some killings were considerably more entertaining than others. Now, I presume many of you will have seen, or can imagine, the kind of Hollywood stylized image of an old execution, very picturesque and sort of dramatic thing, where this pageantry everywhere.